Hi, everyone. My name is Lorena Garcia Wahibi, and I'd like to welcome you to Primary Wave Industry Hour, a summer series that highlights change makers in the music industry, where we will deep dive into who they are, how they are making a difference, and how we can get involved. The past year was tough on many fronts. It has allowed reflection and forced change. We at Primary Wave Music want to be agents of change and are committed to creating and supporting racial equality through education, inclusivity, and action, amplifying the power of music and our platform to fight for social justice. We have dynamic industry leaders joining us for a discussion on diversity and inclusion within the music stages of the future. CEO and founder of Culture Collective, Jonathan Azu, and Noelle Scaggs, the co-leader vocalist of alt-pop band Fitz and the Tantrums, and founder of Diversify the Stage. Up first, Jonathan will fill us in on his industry background to then interview Noelle for a deeper look into her experience and the importance of Diversify the Stage. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to follow along on social media using @PrimaryWave for more information on future Industry Hour sessions. We have a couple episodes live on our YouTube page now, so please be sure to revisit those. Now it's my pleasure to introduce and pass the floor to Mr. Jonathan Azu.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jonathan Azu, CEO and founder of Culture Collective. We are a talent management company. We're also a record label and consulting agency. I've been in the business for just over 20 years. I started my career at CBS Radio, where I spent many years in entertainment partnerships and then made the shift into live events, working at Superfly, who are the founders of the Bonnaroo Music and Arts Festival, as well as Outside Lands, and then spent some years at Red Light Management as general manager. Red Light's, as most of you know, one of the largest independently owned talent management companies in the world. As a person of color, as I went through my journey in growing in my career, I started to notice that I was often the only person of color at that table. And for me, I began to unpack how I got there and who are the people that helped me get there. And the reality of it is that I got to where I'm at in my career on the shoulders of a lot of people that did not look like me, and I'm thankful for them. But looking forward, I started to think about the impact that I wanted to have on the next generation. And I wanted to develop a company where, yes, we represent talent, and I think we're the best at it. But ultimately, we're doing this for reasons bigger than music. We want to push forward diversity initiatives that have an impact on the next generation. Examples of that are recently we launched Diversity in Music, which is a website that helps connect underserved music executives that are currently out of work because of the pandemic with hiring managers, as well as Coalition of Festivals, which is the organization that we co-founded that helps to train festival directors on diversity initiatives to help impact how they hire and how they program to their festival attendees. One of the companies that came out of the pandemic that is making a huge impact on the industry is Diversify the Stage, which was founded by Noelle Scaggs, who is also co-head of Fitz and the Tantrums, one of the biggest touring artists in our industry. And we are lucky to have her here today. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Noelle Scaggs.
Hi. Hello, Jonathan. How are
Hello.
you? Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's always a pleasure, talking to you and, doing what we're doing together now. I'm excited, excited for the future, but thank you for having me.
Thank you. And although we've met once in person, the majority of our conversations have been through Zoom. So
yes. Yes.
Not in a million years would I think that it's like when I think of you in a box, but you're certainly not in a box. You've never been in a box ever in your entire career. I was reading a little bit about your background, and I want to jump into Diversify the Stage, but I also want to unpack how you got to this moment in your life, right? Professionally, personally, and then with the passions that you have around diversity. You grew up in Denver, Colorado, correct?
Yeah, I was born in Denver and I was raised in LA. So I kind of, got the best of both worlds. I moved here when I was moved to LA probably around 6 or 7.
Okay. And then you had a lot of influences growing up. I I had read, it sounds like your household was one in which I would have loved to have spent time
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
parents.
It was great. I mean, my father, a lot of my music, you know, love came from my father's record collection, my aunt's, CDs at the time, because she was, CD. She was the first one in the family to have the CD player and the whole thing. But she was very much into jazz and contemporary music, where my dad was like the funk and the disco, basically all of the hits of this, late 60s, 70s, to early 80s. My dad was all up in that because he was, DJing all the parties. It was like his side hustle in college to make money and also to meet all the girls. That's what he used to tell me. So, I had access to a lot of music when I was growing up, which I think really kind of impacted my writing experience and my ability to kind of, flow between different styles and, work with different types of artists. I'm very thankful for that, that childhood experience.
Yeah, I saw Parliament was one of them. George Clinton, is that
Oh
correct?
yeah. 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 It was like my first introduction to funk was the Funkadelic, really. It was, started there. And then anything that was Nile Rodgers oriented, like was a part of the collection. But then there was also the doo-wop, and we had the Temptations and the Spinners, and all of the singing groups in that collection as well. It's just a part of our culture.
Yeah, I love a good George Clinton story. By the way, shout out to George Clinton, just turned 80 years old. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I started my career off in college producing a George Clinton concert. So it seems like George our Parliament has a common thread throughout a lot of executives and performers' lives,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And
Absolutely.
then personally, shifting from your parents into your own musical taste. I think Michael Jackson was on the list. Was there anybody else on that list that where you were like, you noticed that kind of you're turning that curve of your parents' musical taste into your own?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was when I was really starting to get into K Day, K Day radio station. So it was like Karen White and Belle Biv DeVoe. It was kind of like my cousins were kind of a big influence, because at that period of time they were like in high school. So they were doing all the fun parties and, listening to all, different types of like more in the pop range of music. But it really honestly wasn't until like I heard Digital Underground for the first time that I really started to kind of like move into my own space of, finding new artists and, experiencing hip hop on a very different level than I had ever done before, because there wasn't a lot of hip hop being played in the house. When I was growing up, it was kind of that turning point of it, you know, being NWA leading the West Coast and,
Mhm.
all of these things. So it was a very different trajectory. And it was just stuff that my parents would not allow me to listen to, but as I got older and I could, figure out how to sneak different things, it really opened up a wide, variety of like hip hop music for me. And then in high school, it was always kind of trading Walkmans with a friend of mine who really introduced me to like that New York underground, kind of sound. It was like, I think my first experience of listening to Wu-Tang Clan was because of him. And then I was, starting to also get into like rock, and, a lot of my life was kind of based upon like who I would cross paths with and our musical experience, and how we shared that, that information really helped me kind of grow and identify the things that I really liked. So I really started diving into like alternative and rock and, like really heavy things. Like I was listening to Tool and Metallica, and then, like the classic rock of Rush, and, all of the things that I could get my hands on that had a guitar and, some really wild singing going on.
I'm curious when you started to fall in love with hip hop, you mentioned Wu-Tang,
Yeah.
and some other, did you notice the samples that were in there that did that come into play? Uh,
I did actually, but I think at the time I was so much about lyricism that I think I paid more attention to what was being said and how it was being said than I was the actual production
Mhm.
itself. Like I didn't really deep dive into production elements until I really started recording my own music and identifying how to translate what I was, kind of actually seeing more than hearing, because I've always been a visual person. So I would always kind of like explain my vision for a song based upon what I was visually, imagining in my head, like a scene, color variations, different types of setups, movies, things like that. And that was how I would kind of, explain what I wanted to hear on a track. And then I would start looking for, sounds that incorporated that type of vision. But I was really into the lyrics. Like lyrics, I used to write down the words of every single song that I loved, just to, kind of, I guess I was trying to figure out a map in my head of how people were coming up with this material and, the depth of it.
I find I love, everyone loves lyrics, but I find that
Mhm.
I do not. It took me a lot, like liner notes.
Yeah.
I think we grew up around the same time. Used to be able to, when the CD would come to the house, you actually had all the
Yeah.
lyrics in there, so you could go
Yeah.
along. But it would take me a minute to really get the lyrics down to be able to sing back to it. For you, was it quick? Is there a sense of visual memory, like?
Yeah, it was pretty quick because I think between my listening experience and the action of actually writing it down myself, it was a practice, so I could like literally I could get through an entire Biggie record in, a couple weeks, and know every single word to every single song based upon that practice and how I absorbed it. I think I inherited my mom's, like her memory. She could look at a sequence of numbers and tell you exactly what was on the page in less than like 2 seconds. I think I inherited that part of it from her, but I think it was genuinely the practice of writing something down while trying to like absorb, while listening to it and, the repeating, because it was cassette tape. I was listening to cassette tapes trying to like write down the words of the songs and stuff because we didn't have a CD player in my house. That wasn't until I was in like my high school years.
And that all, bottling all that up
Yeah.
kind of led you into this professional career of music, and which I
Yes.
believe started off in the studio as a
Mhm.
writer, working with others on their songs before you started doing your
Yeah.
own.
Before I started doing my own. Yeah, I made the mistake of one day of singing in front of a couple people when I was in college. I used to hang out with this group called the Dirty Dozen, and they were based out of Pasadena, and it was just like they were cousins. It was I think it was Trey Sean and Pronoun was his nicknames or something like that. But I started hanging out with them, and they were like working on this song, and it was I think they were like sampling Sherelle, or it was like it was a song that I knew, and I just started singing it because it was like part of my childhood. I was like, oh my god, what y'all know about this song? And I started singing. They were like looking at me. They're like, you didn't tell us you could sing. I'd been hanging out with them for like a year, up until that point, but I was very, very quiet about my talent. Like I was studying popular songwriting. I was doing things. So really people only in my class knew that I, was actually a vocalist, that I could write my own material, but it was a very tightly knit group of people. But other folks that I was hanging around with, I wasn't really expressing that. Like I was super shy about it. I wasn't sure if I was good yet, and that experience, I was just being in the studio and I ended up recording their chorus, and it ended up getting them like their first like meeting with Virgin Records. And I think Paul Stewart was the A&R at the time. I think that's his name. Yeah, it's Paul Stewart at the time. And it kind of exploded from there because then it became like word of mouth. It's like, oh, you should get my homegirl to do a chorus on your track, or whatever, or people asking me to perform with them, and I would do stuff, and it just kind of led to that.
And is that when you, at that moment, you saw a career in this?
Yeah, I saw that there was some magic moments that were happening, and I was just kind of going with it. I mean, at the time for me, it was just having fun. I wasn't really thinking about the money part of it. I wasn't really trying to chase the dream. But what I did know is that I wanted to have more experiences in writing songs and like really getting inspired, by working with other people and figuring out how to craft the best material for an album and all of these things like that. That really piqued my interest. The more of that type of work I was doing, it made it so that I wanted to, kind of pursue that for myself. And you know, again, it was a lot of the things were just happening through timing. I'd be at a club and somebody would see me, and 2 weeks later I get a phone call like, yo, could you do this project, or would you be down to kind of sit in with me and my band? And that really led to the climbing of my career. I met my first band through this process, the Rebirth, that I was with for about 8 years, traveled all over the world with those guys, really learned what it was to dig in and to craft music and to really learn how to perform. I didn't really quite know what to do with my hands before that band. Like that was like one of my biggest challenges, was identifying how to stand in myself when I was on a stage, like really be present and not nervous, and you know what I mean, like put it all out there. And I learned a lot being in the Rebirth, which really helped me with doing what I'm doing with Fitz today.
So from Rebirth, there were some other iterations, and then the opportunity with Fitz presented itself.
Yeah, I did a couple. I took a break from music for I think about 2 years or so, and then I was just really I get asked to go on one-off tours with different projects. I toured with this guy Quantic. He's actually based in New York, but at the time he had just moved to Colombia. He's from the UK, a Brighton boy, really big DJ in the scene. And then I was asked to do some other things, and with that I crossed paths with James King, who is our current saxophonist. But I had originally met him from playing on the Rebirth record. He did flute and some other stuff, but so we kind of knew each other through the LA scene. And yeah, just like my path of kind of taking a break, and I would just do things here and there, kind of led to the Fitz project.
And which is amazing, by the way, unbelievable journey. And I always find the most fascinating people in our profession are those that have, I like to say, kind of done a multitude of things, and then they find an intersection where all those things come into play. And that's where you see the explosion of the career. And I think you're an example of that. And somebody that grew up around Black music in the household, was inspired by Black music, is a person of color themselves. At what point did you notice that the back of house of all these experiences that you were looking at the front of house of was different? Like at what point did you say to yourself, this is interesting, I'm not seeing the same?
Yeah, I think, to be quite honest, I think it was very early on, but because I was so used to it, it didn't seem abnormal. Like it felt like that was just the culture of the music industry, was that it was really male dominated, up until, maybe I would probably say like the second tour that Fitz had ever done was when I started to demand more women being on the road with us, because I recognized that they actually existed in the technical space. But before that, it was literally, it didn't matter where we were in the world. It maybe, there was some cultural diversity, but it was primarily men. And that was like the thing that I noticed the most, up until we really started blowing up as Fitz and the Tantrums. And I started, meeting some women executives, mostly, white identifying women, not a lot of women of color at all that I crossed paths with that were heads of anything. And I think probably within the last like 4 years, I'd really started to sit with that, because it didn't feel like it was, it was like, is this just because I'm an alternative, dude? Like, is this just like the way that it is? We're not necessarily considered Black music, from the standpoint of how people qualify genres, right?
Even though it is Black music.
Even though it is Black music, right?
Right.
It's just having that kind of different appeal. Like even our fan base, our fan base is predominantly a white fan base, though we do have a mixture of diversity from age groups, all of these different things. But, we're huge in the Midwest, we're huge in southern regions and, northern territories. But it's honestly, for me, it's not until we start playing like Chicago, LA, like more the kind of like more metro cities, that I start to see more color just in our fan base, but it's still very much male dominated in the background. And if it's not male dominated, it's absolutely devoid of BIPOC identifying folks.
So for 4 years you sat with
sprinkle of us.
It's
Yeah.
a little sprinkle.
Yeah.
And I always say, it's always like, a little sprinkle, it's not enough to not notice it. And then it's enough to know that when you see somebody like at a meeting or at a show, you gravitate towards, you're like, it's like the Spider-Man, right? Like we're pointing at each other. You exist. So it's that with you for 4 years. And then I'm just curious, what was the response like when you started to demand more women have presence on your tours? And then eventually, we'll get into Diversify the Stage, but what was that response like from the industry, and how did you go about doing that? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
I mean, our management, attorneys, representation was very mixed, female, male, right? So after that first tour for me, I just can't, I had a conversation because at the time we had a female male partner management team. And, I talked to her and I was like, listen, I'm kind of tired of being the only woman. And it was also something that our tour manager at the time recognized and thought that it would be important to have more balance on the road, because I think he saw that I was lonely, like there was like a disconnect, and I'd be coming on the bus and it's just like everybody's stuff was everywhere. And it was just like, no, it was like, I'm not one of the guys. Like I have needs and things that you can't necessarily identify with because you are a male. And I think we need to have more of that representation on the tour to balance out this testosterone. It was really at that point just kind of like an energy level and just the recognition that, oh, Noelle is a woman, and I have certain needs. I may be on my cycle when we're starting the tour. You know what I'm saying? And to not have anybody that can like identify with that, it kind of leaves you in this really lonely place. It's like, shit, like, I have to think about the closed lid on the thing, and how do I ask for the runner to go and get my my necessities if I've run out, you know what I mean? Like, and I can't drive myself anywhere. Like it was a lot of those kinds of things. So having, more women just on that plane, right, that can understand, like, I'm not necessarily, having the best day, and it's nobody's fault, but this is what's happening with me internally. But how do I express that to like 12 dudes? You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just like those kinds of things. It's just like an energetic thing. And, it's like after we started bringing women on the road, it just became like people got, like, the guys got it. They're like, it completely changes the energy on the bus. There's just a very different, thing that happens with the balance of the two, so, for just having that conversation, it was pretty easy. And then once we kind of installed that, that's how we've always floated. Like, it's like our team now is pretty much 50-50.
And what were the first elements that you saw that change happen?
What do you mean, like the first elements?
Meaning, because it was in the industry, and I've been around back of houses for a long time, and there's a lack of minorities, and there's certainly a lack of women. And I would be curious, as you look out there, one of the things I always hear from hiring managers is that we just can't find them. So I'm curious, where were you able to find those that were either female and or of color to start to integrate into your touring setting?
When we started looking at audio technicians, I mean, one of the and also just production coordinators. Like, we started with the production coordinator, and then we moved into looking for actual technicians that were female identifying. So, it's like by the time we had gotten our production assistant, I think whatever walk they did, it was word of mouth. There wasn't like, a database or whatever. It could have also been just asking the vendor supplier, because we contract our third party for things, and just stating like it would be great if we can have like a female monitor engineer on this next run. And I think that was really the work of our tour managers, making it a priority for us to do that.
And one of the things that it's interesting, because obviously I don't identify with some of the things that you mentioned on your tour being a woman, but one of the things that I always struggle a little bit as a person of color on the executive side was when there would be an incident or a thing that would happen in society that would make it somewhat awkward in settings of those that are not of color around race.
Yeah.
In that conversation around race, right? I'm curious for you with Diversify the Stage, which I believe was there was a lot of things that came out of what happened in Minneapolis.
Oh yeah.
And so you're sitting with this. Minneapolis happens. The world's taken back by it. Take me through how that sitting with things turned into the action of, let me make this impact bigger than what's happening on my tour. Let me make it industry wide.
I think at that point I had hit my wit's end of the performative diversity bullshit that I was seeing. I was
Performative in
dealing
the
with
sense
a lot
of companies. I'm sorry
in the sense of the sense of like, after everything happened with George, all of a sudden there was this outpouring of social media, and for me it was kind of like, y'all, we've been watching people get murdered by the police for years, but on the internet for the last 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, and it wasn't a part of the conversation, right? But I think with, timing, the pandemic, us forced to be at home, you can't turn away, all of these things, like it was a beautiful kind of, I guess, explosion, right? With that, I started thinking about my life, my friend group, and recognizing that my entire life had been very either segregated in some way. It was like within my Black family, right? My Black family, because I come from a Black family. Like those are my roots, right? Without my family, I didn't have a lot of diversity in my friend group. Like coming from LA is frankly very segregated. If you live here, it. It's hard to find pockets of culture depending upon where you live in the city. I was living in Silver Lake. I was used to Latinx. I was used to Asian. When I was going to South Pasadena High School, it was primarily Asian and white, a handful of us that identified as Black. But I was looking at my life, and I was in Nashville, so when George Floyd happened, not only was I away from my family here in LA and my really close friends, I was also trying to identify with, friends that didn't know me for 20 years, and trying to express how I was feeling to people that could never identify with my experience because they just never had to, So I had one friend, my friend Kimberly Lewis, who I've actually known for 20 years, who happens to live in Nashville, and we leaned heavily upon one another. But she also recognized that part in her life as well, moving from LA to Chicago to Nashville, meeting her husband who was white, and just having that experience herself. So we found comfort in one another and being able to identify with this particular struggle. Blackout Tuesday happened online, and I had taken a little bit of break from the news and stuff. Blackout Tuesday happened, and I was starting to see more and more companies coming and saying they're promising millions towards social impact and all of these things, and I was like, but nobody is talking about what is happening in this billion-dollar touring industry. Now, mind you, I had been thinking about this for a couple of years, right? And I actually had already started questioning my tour manager, like, why haven't we ever hired anybody that looks like me? Like what, what's the obstacle here? Like, I think we've hired one Latino and, it's been mostly white. Like what's the deal? And I started asking more questions. And with that came some more answers, and I just decided like, I'm going to start poking holes in how productions are run. Like, how do we find staff? Like, is there a central infrastructure? And for me at that point, it was just for me to kind of understand how the hiring process was going. I wasn't even thinking about starting anything, but I wanted to have the dialogue and maybe pique the, bring more of this conversation to people that I cross paths with over touring. And it just turned into something as it progressed. The more conversations I had, I recognized that there seemed to be a need for an organization to, one, really look at how we're hiring people. That was really the biggest thing. Like, what is, if our biggest obstacle is not having a central infrastructure to find qualified members of teams and take this word of mouth practice and use the technology that's there to really widen the net of opportunities for people. Well, let me start having conversations with folks that maybe want to buy into this. Or is there somebody that's already doing that? So I called a friend of mine named Hugh Myers, who is a technical genius. He's one of my tech consultants. Now I invested in one of his companies. And, we just started talking. I was like, so, if I am, a person that is trying to create a platform that is going to be targeted towards HR services, basically, how could I go about doing that? And how do I serve the purpose of diversity within that? Like, what are my parameters? So we really started talking about the technical side. And while I was doing that, I was being introduced to more people. And then Jerome Crooks came around, and one of the conversations.
And Jerome, just for everyone's education, Jerome is one of the most legendary tour managers in the business. He worked with David Bowie. Who else?
He's a tour manager for Tool. Soundgarden. He's worked with Oasis. Like, I mean, the man is incredible. And I mean, meeting Jerome, it was shortly after I'd had a conversation with Hugh about like maybe identifying something that is already existing, right? Figuring out where its obstacles are, fixing that loophole, and then publicizing it to become a tool for people to use. So that's initially what had, when I'd ended up crossing paths with Jerome, and we had this shared, passion for action, moving towards inaction. And he told me about neverfamous.com, which he basically created to fill in that void, to fill in that need, to be able to have tour personnel be able to market their businesses and their talents to hiring managers and doing direct connections in this way. So if you as a hiring manager are in need of, a production coordinator for a tour, you lost yours, you want a specific, you want to hire a female, you know what I'm saying? Like you want to, be able to set parameters on what you're looking for, you can do that, so he created this platform. And one of the issues he was having was really populating it, because he had launched it and did like a soft launch, like beta of it in 2018. Then 2019 came around, and then we were in pandemic mode.
Yeah. And in 2018, people hadn't quite, I always say there was almost two awakenings for our industry. One was the more macro. Did you see that on the news? I can't believe that happened. This is horrible. This isn't right. And then there was the industry looked at itself in the mirror and said, oh, I think we actually may be part of this problem too. Because I always talk about the pyramid of systemic racism, and what we saw in Minneapolis was the very peak of the pyramid. And in a million years, I never would imagine that anyone I worked with or have worked with and will work with would think that was right. But if you go down the pyramid, there's so many other manifestations of systemic racism in our industry. It's almost like I always joke with people. It's like that gravestone that says, "I told you I was sick." And it's like, we've been sitting here for a long time saying that, that there's an issue. So with Jerome being so early in 2018 on this initiative, and then in 2020, people kind of, waking up to it. So very top line, what are the elements of Diversify the Stage? How do people engage with the website and the initiative?
Yeah, so I mean, Diversify the Stage honestly has become it is a collective of industry professionals that are all working towards the same goal. What I wanted to do with Diversify the Stage was really take that conversation that Hugh and I had about identifying things that were already in existence and seeing where they had obstacles, and using my platform and my ability to hop on the phone with people to help push that, to get around it. I started a college age program identifying that a lot of young people, especially within, our BIPOC communities, don't know a lot about the career opportunities that are available in the live community. Unless you've taken theater, unless you've studied or you've been introduced to it somehow, pulled into somebody's band. Half of y'all don't know what a tour manager does. Half of y'all don't know the difference between a manager and an agent, like all of these things. So it really came down to the introduction of careers to young people that are interested in breaking into the music industry, that probably don't know that you don't have to be the A&R at a record label to create a viable, career along, one that pays really well either. If you're in marketing, if you're a young journalist, and, all of these things, you can take and apply those to things that are within the live community as well. So it's really about the education. And then it's the pathways. It's creating pipelines, creating more accessible pipelines to real-time experiences. It's a lot of our young people are getting into these internships, and they're taking one after another because it's required for college, right? They need that internship depending upon what program they're in, but then it doesn't go any further beyond that. So you end up graduating and you have this internship experience, but an internship experience is not enough sometimes. It's not enough to get you in the door when you're trying to get that entry level position, depending on if you're looking at the record label or the agency, all of these things, but definitely on the road. If you want to break in and try to get into the festival and work all these things, it is a very different pathway. And if you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't have enough experience on your resume to even get looked at for an interview, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be on the road unless somebody knows you, that knows that tour manager that is looking for somebody. So it is a lot more difficult to break into the live industry, I personally think, than it is in other areas, that are now starting to change and shift, and recognizing that they have to do better. You need to hire diversely. Every global chain has to have a chief diversity officer. That is not necessarily true for a tour director's company, or even the vendor suppliers, any of that. They can kind of get away with doing what they're doing because it's based upon skill set and their parameters for how long you need to be in the industry to even get on their team.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I also think that there's a sense of immediacy about it, because in the touring world, you need somebody yesterday.
Yeah.
So
the
you look in front of you, behind you, next
real.
to you, and you grab the person and you throw them in there, and you have to know it's going to work. There's no margin for it just didn't work out. We needed to, after a few weeks, it just didn't vibe. Like, it needs to work. Yeah. So that experience is super important. Very, very important.
And it's also the challenge of ability to pay for another body on the bus, right? Paying for a body on the bus that doesn't have the experience to tour yet, especially in an outfit where you need to know that when you turn around, your production coordinator knows how to fix the issue that just happened without you needing to take on that role. I get it, but at the same time, if we want to see change happen, we have to make some adjustments within our businesses in order for that to play out. We can't anticipate we can't expect things to change if we're not willing to start bending into areas of workflow that have worked for other businesses. We have to look at our touring industry and look at the roadblocks that people are finding and getting in, and open the door, like fix it. A big part of our Diversify the Stage is not only the education, it's also the mentorship behind it. Taking a young person under your wing and guiding them and helping them navigate the territory. And then it's presenting those opportunities. It takes nothing for a tour manager to present a shadowing opportunity to somebody that is trying to get in the door. It takes nothing for a venue on a local level to bring in somebody of color into their venue as a runner, or to help with merchandise. It takes them nothing to do that, but it's a matter of this person that wants to get in knowing that opportunity is available to them.
Yeah, and I think also
so
too,
that's what we're trying to do.
No, and you're right. I kind of balance this perspective in my head that I'm happy the industry is moving towards a direction or having the conversation. There is, to your point, you were talking about corporate America and the need for people to hire a diversity chief, and all that good stuff. And so it's in a way, do you feel like they're being forced into it, or you think there is a sense in our industry specifically? Do you think there's a sense of willingness and wanting to make these changes, or is this good for business?
I think for some, and I guess it depends on the business, right? I think for some, in my experience so far, that genuinely want to see this work and are trying to figure out the best steps to do that. Again, what are the obstacles that we're facing? If it is in recruitment and we're not getting the candidates that stay, like looking at our turnover rates, like why are our turnover rates so high? Looking at the positions that most people of color are given over folks that are not. I think there's a lot of assessing that has to happen to move forward. But when you're dealing with people that are running companies that have never had to experience adversity in the way that we have, that have never experienced being left out of the room on a consistent basis, it is really hard to teach them how to not, I'm sorry, be systemically racist. It is really hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to bring in folks that have experienced it. One of the biggest challenges I've had isn't in the conversations that I've had with people that just could never identify with what I'm talking about. And trying to make them, give them a directive on how to market their internships and their, how they bring in an apprenticeship program that could be like a 2-week thing. You know what I'm saying? Even bigger in how to pay and paying for it.
Yes.
Because there has to be investment. You cannot get with an organization like mine and think you're not going to pony up some dollars towards paying people for this type of training. Like it has to be a willingness for industry to buy into the change that they want to see, and then also the willingness to talk to people that have experienced this and work with them. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see more of these boards that are full of color, not just one woman of color to be that like consultant for the Black experience. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there needs to be a lot of assessing and how we are approaching the steps that we want to take and who is a part of the conversation. And then the action, it's like, if you know that it's going to take probably about $400,000 to run a program to help young people get there, and you're making upwards multi-million dollars a year, you can allocate that $400,000 to make that program happen.
Yeah, and or just at the very least, I mean, it's one thing that I noticed on the executive side is internships. And I
Yeah.
think back, I think there were some internships I was paid to do and some I was not. But in my experience working professionally, not only did most of the companies, if not all the companies I worked for, not pay interns, these positions were coveted to those that had relationships within the building. And most of the
Yeah.
relationships within the building were with executives, and those executives were not of color. So therefore, it was a very, very non-diverse internship pool every single year. And often they were children of affluent parents that could afford
Yeah.
to have their kids spend 20 to 40 hours a week working for free. And then in some cases, I've even seen it after the internship. I mean, like, you've graduated from college, and in theory, you really are past internship world, and you're still working for free for companies, which is basically slave labor. Let's just unpack it, right? It's basically,
pretty much is.
Right? It pretty much is. And I told somebody the other day, you know, we pay our interns at Culture Collective, and we're a small company. Like, by the way, it's like, we're nowhere near the size of the majority of well-established management companies. But ultimately, I told them that there's two reasons why you should be paid, especially as somebody of color. One, because it helps diversify the pool. It gives everybody somewhat of a fair playing field. I'm not saying that it has to be all the money in the world, but it has to be something. And the second thing is that it makes you know you're worth something.
Yes.
It makes you know that you're worth something. And I think oftentimes in our industry, especially people of color, start at a lower level on the trajectory of pay scale because they may not think that they're actually worth something when they're starting off their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's even thinking about who we're marketing things to, or eligibility requirements, right? Because when we're thinking about a lot of these internships, a lot of the eligibility requirements are for those that are earning an associate's or their bachelor's, right? You have to be in school in order to get in, because a lot of their partnerships with, colleges and collegiate institutions require a college credit, right? So you can get away with just giving college credit for this labor, that you're ultimately getting for free, because it should be about the experience and the knowledge that you're gaining from the opportunity that you otherwise wouldn't have if this internship didn't exist. How freaking elitist is that, to think of it in that way, versus thinking about you are bettering someone's life and livelihood by paying them a rate that you can actually afford to pay for a body to be there. So unless they're volunteering, right? If you're volunteering, you're respecting the time that somebody can commit to volunteering for your program, if you're a grassroots or whatever. But most grassroots people pay the folks that they're bringing on because they recognize the value there, especially if they can afford to do it. They're not bringing on free labor unless they have nothing in the bank, because nobody else is helping them through the process of being able to fill the need, right? So it's looking at college differently, looking at the student, criteria for getting into a lot of these internships. I've really tried to encourage a lot of companies to, start really reanalyzing that, or creating programs that don't have that requirement in it, because you're missing out on an entire larger pool of individuals who may not be in school or have graduated and are still trying to get their foot in the door, that may need that additional kind of like training experience and that mentorship, like all of these things. It's like just readjusting that little thing can open up the door for millions of kids, that otherwise wouldn't even think that they could get in, so they won't even apply. You know how many of my students I've had not apply because of that one little statement where they fit the criteria across the board in other areas? It's insane.
Yeah, I taught at USC this past semester, arts management remotely, and my first day of class, and I felt very honored that the university asked me to do it, but was you don't really need this to do what I do.
Oh yeah.
I think so. Our industry is That's the beauty of it. Some of the best executives I know in the industry have no formal training doing this. So you're right to put that barrier in front of as a filter of that's what it takes to get an internship here, not to get paid, but get an internship here, is that you have to have those requirements is also an example.
I mean, and it's not to take anything away from folks that are in school. I mean, everybody does work hard in their way, but I found the people that are the most hungry are those folks that can't afford to go to college, that may be at the community college, that are taking classes. They're learning how to be entrepreneurs because they have to. Those are the ones that I'm trying to get into those hiring positions because they think differently. They think out of the box. They have to do the hustle. They have to know how to hustle you have to know how to hustle in order to make it into this business. So those are the kinds of folks that I'm looking at when I'm looking at opportunities, because they're trying to get out of their neighborhood. They're trying to, to move a different way than their family experience has allowed them to, or their lack of family experience has allowed them to. Those are the kids that I'm trying to get into those positions of becoming hiring managers and all of these things, and showing them that there are people that care, that want to be a part of their journey through this mentorship process. That there are executives and businesses that care about their experience as being apprentices and interns and paying them properly. I literally will not take on a partner that does not offer paid internship experience unless they're willing to sponsor the cohort's way. You can't do it.
Yep.
I can't do it.
And that's the other part of this too, is and you're in a position of power, like I am, and like many others are, to lay a line in the sand and say that we're not doing that. We're not moving past this unless this is corrected. I'm not hitting the stage unless this is corrected. I'm not confirming that date unless this is corrected. And we're in that position to be able to do that. And just to connect the dots for those that are watching this on the internship side is the reason why we're talking about the college filter, the ability that you have to be in college to be applicable to have an internship. Then it becomes, well, how elite is the school that you went to? And to unpack that, most communities of color, students that come out of high school have great challenges getting into colleges. And it's not always from an academic perspective. Sometimes it's from an economical perspective of being able to get into a college. The other side of it is, and we witnessed this with, multiple Ivy League schools who had parents that were paying for their kids to get into the schools that could have gone to potentially a person of color. So there's all different things to kind of unpack the systemic tie. And again, think about that pyramid, right? So, the very bottom of the pyramid is we don't pay interns. But when you start leveling up on the pyramid, that's when you just start to discover the systemic ties that impact that has, and the issues that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things when people are asking me how they can, be a part of Diversify the Stage, or how they can get involved. I mean, there's several ways, being a masterclass speaker in our annual series, committing time to, out of your day for 90 minutes to talk to young people, tell them about your career path, how you did things, how your work functions, and your experience, right? And how you got to where you are. Second is becoming a mentor for somebody. It's a 6-month commitment, once a month meeting minimum, for an hour meeting with your cohort, and y'all can extend that relationship as far as you want to take it. Even after the program's done. But it's really committing to the creation of pipeline. If you have an internship program that you're running, and it is annual, committing to, allotting 2 slots in your internship program, first right of refusal for Diversify the Stage, member, but also thinking about, with Diversify the Stage, we are partnering up with other nonprofit organizations. So if my cohort doesn't fit, or cohort participant doesn't fit, I have access to other community organizations that are doing very similar work, and we pass that information on to them. And it kind of keeps this flow going, right? It keeps this kind of community driven action plan together. But the opportunities have to be there for folks, touring personnel, taking somebody under your wing, being able to create an opportunity. There are sponsorship dollars out there that are available. We've partnered up with IEBA, which is the International Entertainment Buyers Association. They give millions of dollars in scholarships for folks that are taking on internships, whether or not they're paid or not. So that is money that is available to folks. And I think their scholarships start about up to about 1,200. And if there's additional need for, say, somebody that's transferring to a different city or state that needs assistance with, housing or additional financial thing, that money goes directly to that person. So there are things like that. We're talking about millions of dollars in social impact, and you don't know how you're socially impacting anything. That's a waste of millions of dollars. Give that money to me. Give that money to Music Forward Foundation. Give that money to Well Done. Give that money to, Diversify Music, all the things like that, coalition of festivals, people that are actually acting, that are having an impact, be it getting, externship at Bonnaroo, which is what Well Done has been doing for years, doing the All Access program, which is inspiring young people. This is what Music Forward is doing right now. There are incredible programs out there, but I'm watching millions and millions of dollars be poured into institutions that are not really having an effect on our business, They're just not, and I only know this because I'm watching it happen.
And you're seeing it at a very high level. That's one of the unique things, especially in the genre of music that you live in. You get a chance to see things at a very high level and build some relationships at a very high level of some decision makers. So you're reading about it, but you're actually also physically seeing it, in these meetings, which makes you very unique to be on the forefront of the fight. And that's why we're lucky to have you. I always say in life, you can't be what you don't see. And we certainly see you on the stage having an impact for that next generation. And it's amazing. It's always been there, but over the last 15 months to see the impact that you're now having on the back of house. And I want to leave you with one question that next Noelle Scaggs or Jerome or Jonathan Azu, that person out there, what advice would you give them that they're watching this right now as they look to fulfill and turn their passions into careers?
I think knowing what your ask is imperative, because we're working with a lot of folks that don't know how to do this, right? So you have to kind of tell them what you need, or tell them what you want, and not pussyfoot around the conversation, and I learned that through first experience with dealing with a very important high executive, who I love dearly, and I'm just going to say her name, Julie Greenwald. We get on the phone, and I was so excited. I was telling her about all the things. She's like, Noelle, she's like, I love all of this, but I'm a very busy person, and I want to help you, but you got to tell me exactly what you need right now. And her doing that just changed the way that I approached all of my conversations after that. Like, for me, that was like the mentor, little bit of like seed planted in my head. So now I can walk in any room and I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I need. Can you do it? And if you can do that, what can you do here? To being able to ask those questions very pointedly, especially with the work we're doing, because we're literally dealing with people that have not had to think about this. Their businesses have been flourishing despite the lack of diversity in the industry. So you have to tell
executives,
them
they're fine
what you
too.
need. And they're fine, right?
They're great.
They're unaffected. Right now, there are some people just living through the residuals of guilt. So I want to work with people that it is literally implanted in them that this is important, it is more than just the right thing to do. It is better for your business to think about things in this way, and to really create more diverse and inclusive workspaces. Your businesses will thrive that much further to consider it in that way. If we're thinking about numbers, right? So it's just a matter of, I think, being very direct, and I've had to tell Jerome this. I'm like, don't beat around a bush. You need money for Never Famous. Tell them how much it costs to run it. You know what I mean? And if people want to help, they will. I think it's just really folks understanding the importance of the dollar for organizations and for small, companies that are really, really trying to shift the narrative.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
that's quite hit people yet. They just expect that they're going to get access to all of these wonderful kids and everything's going to be bright and sunny, and you know what I mean, we'll help out with a couple galas. It's like, no, man, this costs money. It costs
Yeah.
money to manage and run and basically do the HR stuff that you have people doing that aren't doing it.
And we're at a unique intersection too.
Yeah.
'Cause I like to say that we've spent a considerable amount of time at home. Now we're out working again, and this is an important initiative for the industry. But once the tour bus breaks down and that becomes the issue of the day, well, everything else gets swept under the rug.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you keeping it on the forefront too. I mean, the industry is very lucky to have you. I thank you. We thank you. And I look forward to seeing you out on the road this year.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
We want to give a huge thank you to Jonathan Azu and Noelle Scaggs for that meaningful and impactful conversation. Please be sure to check out on social media at Diversify the Stage, at Coalition of Org, and at Primary Wave to find more ways to support. Be sure to check out the other episodes of Industry Hour, and we appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, bye.